excited about tonight's call. My sweet friend from college, who's also married to one of my pledge sister, who also is a fan of Beachbody, Jon Singletary, is going to be on our call tonight. And I was posting some stuff about Enneagrams, and he's like, oh, wait, you're not doing it right. And I'm like, wait, okay, help me. I need to know, what am I doing wrong? But let me just kind of go back of why I kind of started Enneagram, and then I'm going to let Jon take it away. But, you know, part of our values for our team is impact. We want to impact people, and that is our goal, and that's who we are. And part of that is actually knowing people. How will we get to know them better? And if we're going to impact people, we have to be able to communicate with them, right? We can't just like vomit on them. We can't just treat everyone the same. As you're learning to impact people, you can impact people differently. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about our purpose. Our purpose is to really help people, and if we're really focused on our purpose and we're also focused on impact, we really have to know how to communicate with people. And so the Enneagram, I started studying it, I think last March. I read it, I was like, whatever. And then I really started reading it some more this fall because I was like, I need personality types. I work with a lot of different personality types. I'm married to a different personality type. And so I was like, how can I communicate more effectively to my spouse and my coaches and my challengers? And so I started studying into Enneagram, and truthfully it was more about my spouse. But it has a lot to do with our customers and our coaches, and how we can better serve them and serve our spouses, right? So anyway, so that is something that I wanted to bring Jon on. I was like, Jon so graciously offered to share with us tonight. He is part of the sociology department at Baylor University. So of course he is loved by us, and especially me and my family, and Sick'em Bears. And so I'm just gonna let him go ahead and get started. And but I want to, Jon, you're unmuted now, and I wanted to hear kind of how you got started in kind of studying the Enneagram. I'm guessing because you are part of the Department of Sociology at Baylor, but wanted to kind of hear a little bit more of how you got started.
Yeah, of course. Well, hi all. Thank you so much for letting me join you tonight. It really is such an honor to get to be a part of this group. I truly do value what Beachbody does so much. And I'm grateful for the years that I've been connected to the work of Beachbody and the difference that you're making in people's lives. It really is phenomenal. So keep up the good work. And thank you, Stephanie, for your leadership and for including me. So I got introduced to the Enneagram. Actually, I heard about it at seminary. I went to seminary before I studied social work. I have my master's in from the seminary and in social work, and learned about it then, but it didn't, because I didn't figure out my number. There are 9 types, 9 numbers. It's just kind of sound foreign until you figure out your number. And then about 10 years ago, my wife and I were in a small group with some friends from our church, and we all read a book together. And that's when it kind of caught on. I saw the light, figured out my number, helped Wendy figure out her number. It's changed our relationship, totally changes how we communicate, totally changes how we parent. Our whole school uses it. So many people at Baylor use it as well. We teach it in several different corporations, nonprofit organizations, and schools around the country. And it really is a pretty phenomenal tool.
So 10 years ago, y'all got started. That was like way before it was cool.
Yeah, I know, right? So a friend of the chaplain at Baylor, a Methodist minister, his wife teaches it and she started teaching it like 20 years ago, and we got connected to her 10 years ago. Her book came out 3 years ago. She's Suzanne Stabile. She's in Dallas. Her book is The Road Back to You. It's one of the best-selling books on the Enneagram the past few years with Ian Cron. But she's been a mentor of ours for 10 years now.
Who knew? In Little Waco.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. How cool. Okay, well, I'm going to let you get started, and I'll pull up the photo and with that and as well, and kind of let you take it away.
Yeah, so with the photo up, I might not be able to see everyone. I can still see the blueprints across the top. Might not be able to see the comments on the side. I'm gonna see if I can. I don't know if it'll let me do all of that at once. Oh yeah, I think it will. So I'm gonna ask a question. I don't know if y'all can also still use comments while I'm talking, but want you to jump in at least through the group chat is the easiest way to do that. And I might not be able to answer everything you're asking, but if you'll just kind of, I'll ask some questions. If you can type your chat response, that'd be great. If you want to type in questions that way, if you do have access to that, that's great. So the first thing I want to know is just how many of you have heard of the Enneagram? How many of you know your number? I can see a few hands. I can't see everybody's snapshot. So if you know your number, type it in and we'll let that scroll through the chat. If this is the first time you've heard about the Enneagram, just say no or clueless or I have no idea what this word is you keep saying again, any or what. Look at that. Most of you know your number. That's fantastic. I love it. So one of the things I do is I try to teach it in such a way so that even if you do know your number, there's still something you can learn from this format. And we have a pretty tight window tonight, but we're going to do our best to see if those of you who don't know your number might be able to figure it out. And those of you who do know your number can gain some kind of application that really does have value, both in your professional as well as in your personal life. So that really is my hope for tonight, although I know that's a lot for this 30-minute window. So a couple of background things I'll say first, and then we'll talk about the 9 numbers really quick and what I kind of do is a quick tour of the Enneagram. The first thing I want to say is tied to what Stephanie was starting out saying to us at the beginning, which is just how important this is for communication, for being effective, and how you present yourself and how you understand others that you're working with. Of course, in a business like this, those relationships matter more than anything, and the connections really matter. And one of the things that we often struggle with in connections is just what is the way that we click or don't click with someone else. And a lot of times it's based on these kinds of differences, on these kinds of personality differences. Sometimes we rub people the wrong way or they rub us the wrong way, or we don't understand why we're not connecting. We don't understand why it's so hard to make the kind of connection that we want with some people. And then with others, it just seems to come so easily. And a lot of it really is tied to personality. So hopefully, because so many of you do know your number, that's something that you have been able to realize, that you've been able to really see, oh yes, I have learned this about myself. I know that this is true. So hopefully some of these messages we talk about will already resonate with you. One of the things related to that I really like to highlight in terms of the Enneagram is that while it teaches you something about yourself and personality, it really does teach you how to be gracious to yourself. It really is a great tool for self-compassion and compassion with others. Sometimes when we don't connect with people, when we're not making the relationship work like we want, of course we get frustrated, we get upset, we end up beating ourselves up. And the Enneagram is such a great tool to offer some generosity to ourselves, some compassion to ourselves, to be able to help us see, well, I have these patterns, I have these habits that have followed me around most of my life, and it gives you a chance to see those a little more clearly and then maybe work through them in a way that very few other tools have allowed us to do in our relationships. So it gives you that compassion for yourself, and then of course it does the same thing by giving you that compassion to others, realizing, oh, this person isn't just being hard to talk to because they just don't want to connect with me. Maybe it is because they're a 5. Maybe it's because they're a 4. Maybe it's because they're one of these more introverted numbers. It's because they're one of these numbers that really wants to make sure they understand things before they talk or before they connect. And that's just more true with some personalities with others. Or maybe they rub you the wrong way because they just feel so aggressive, or they talk more than I'm hoping, or maybe when they do talk, they come across with this confidence that I just don't have, or maybe even they just rub me a little bit the wrong way. Well, of course, there are some numbers that are certainly that way. Maybe you know if that's one of your numbers. So knowing that about yourself and about others is so key, and really is at the heart of what the Enneagram is that tool just to be able to be a little more gracious to yourself and a little more gracious to others. And one of the things that we know about our personality is that it follows us everywhere we go. It follows us everywhere we go, but oftentimes we don't see it. It's the strange thing about personality. It's always there, but it's often unhidden because we live our lives on what we often call autopilot. We're just going around doing our work. We're busy. Many of us are married or in significant relationships. We have children. We have friends of children. We have schoolwork. And then you have this professional life on top of that. Maybe it's a side gig. Maybe you're doing more than one thing. There's so many things that keep us busy. So who has time to really stop and pay attention to our personality? Who has time to really stop and think about, how did I communicate? What was happening with me in these interactions? And the Enneagram really does invite that kind of reflection or introspection, or what in social work we call just self-awareness. Self-awareness, we all know, is important. It's a buzzword that really has sunk in to our lives in many ways. We want to be self-aware, but it's one of those things that we know is important, but it's hard to do. So how do we develop self-awareness? How do we really get to know ourselves? And to some of you, that will just sound strange. What are we talking about, getting to know ourselves? Well, it's hard to be compassionate to yourself if you don't really know yourself. It's hard to know what gets in the way of relationships and what gets in the way of effective communication if you don't know yourself, if you can't see some of these parts of yourself. There are several writers that I love, some of whom write about the Enneagram from a Christian perspective, and some of whom are not religious writers. One of the writers that we use at Baylor has talked about the Enneagram as a mirror for the soul. And I love that phrase. The Enneagram is a mirror for the soul. It's a tool that we can use to see ourselves in a new way, to see into the depth of our lives, to see into our soul. And that's such an inviting idea to think about. How do we learn to see ourselves that clearly? But it's something that's hard to know how to do. And it's hard to know how to do it because we just don't slow down enough. We just don't stop. We don't stop and really reflect on what's working in the conversations I'm having and what's not working. What's not working because of these habits I have, these habitual patterns, these behaviors, and what causes them. Well, it's hard to know what causes them if we don't see them. And it's hard to see them if you don't stop and look for them, if you don't stop and look in that mirror. Now, one of the things that we also know is true is that it's much easier to see these kinds of things in other people than it is ourselves. One of my favorite phrases related to the Enneagram is this idea of non-judgmental self-observation. It's a mouthful. Non-judgmental self-observation. We live in a culture that's really good at judgmental observation. We are just trained to look around, to see things, and to judge things. We look around and we can't help but think, oh, I cannot stand that. Ooh, I don't like that. I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad I don't have to do that. I'm glad those aren't my kids. I'm glad that's not my spouse. I'm glad I'm not working there. I'm glad I don't have to live there. It's just automatic sometimes. We just see things and we judge things, sometimes not in the nicest way. But it's much harder to do self-observation than it is to observe others. And it's harder to observe ourselves non-judgmentally. Often because we look around and judge the world so harshly, sometimes when we look at ourselves, we do the same thing. We look at ourselves and we just list the things, often subconsciously, sometimes consciously, sadly, that we don't like. We just list the things of, oh, I just beat myself up for this and this and this. And we just do too much of that to ourselves. We're too hard on ourselves, and we don't want to admit it. We don't really want to think about it. And when we catch ourselves doing it, we often just kind of quickly reframe. We just want to turn it inside out and think about the positives. What the Enneagram says, and this idea of non-judgmental self-observation, is to take those things seriously, but to hold them lightly. Don't beat yourself up for them, but notice the things in your life that do cause these kinds of struggles. Name them, but don't let them become something that you use to beat yourself up any more than you already do. But at the same time, it's hard to move past them if you don't name them. If you can't see the things that are causing difficulties, it's hard to learn the lessons of life to be able to grow in the ways that the Enneagram really wants us to be able to grow. One of the things that is also true about this kind of work is not only is it hard to see ourselves and hard to see ourselves graciously, it's hard to take the time to even make sense of it when we do see it. So one of the things that we often encourage in Enneagram work is journaling about what am I learning about myself? How can I learn to know that I'm not these habits, I'm not these patterns, but I am God's beloved child. I am a person who has value. I'm a person who can make a difference. I'm a person who loves and is loved. And we know things like gratitude journals really do make a huge difference in our lives. And it really is related to Enneagram work to think about that kind of a practice, that kind of an idea that really can make a difference for us. So learning to see ourselves, learning to be kind to ourselves, learning to pay attention to these things really does make a difference. There's another tool that we use at Baylor that's pretty popular right now that's called StrengthsFinder. Well, StrengthsFinder is a great tool. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you can list your top 5 strengths as well. But one of the things that we know about StrengthsFinder is that as good as those are, we don't really learn how to use those to grow in new directions. The Enneagram as a tool really can help us learn to grow in a different way. Because when we get in trouble with a relationship, when things don't go our way, when we walk away from a job, when we walk away from important people, it's not usually because of our top 5 strengths. It's usually because of something painful, some kind of personality struggle that we just haven't known how to deal with, and maybe that we haven't even seen in our lives. And the Enneagram says, look at those things. Look in depth at yourself, at the kinds of things that are difficult to see, but that if you don't see, you'll never be able to change and grow in the ways that as a person of faith you might want to grow, as a leader you might want to grow, and as a person who just values relationships, you know you want to grow. So the Enneagram at its core really does point out some struggles as well as some strengths. Actually, one of the other kind of mantras of the Enneagram is too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Or another way of saying it is that we all have strengths, and when you over rely on one strength, it really does become a weakness. So each of the 9 numbers around the Enneagram has a core strength, but what we've done is we've convinced ourselves that that's the only strength we have, or it's the strength that we should use in every situation. And so I like to pick on the 2s. I see some of you are 2s. 2s are helpers. When we first hear about the Enneagram, everybody wants to sign up to be a 2. Well, you don't get to pick your number. Your number is really something you were probably born with or that you developed early in life, and your number doesn't change. Your personality doesn't change. Even if you don't talk in terms of Enneagram, the personality you have in early childhood is just reinforced in adolescence and young adulthood, and even into adulthood. That's still the core of who you are. 2 of our children are 8s, and my wife is an 8. So there's a lot of that 8 energy. And if you know anything about 8s, they have a lot of energy. Well, my wife can tell you that she was that way from her earliest memories. And in raising those 2 out of our 4 children, that's absolutely true for them. From the earliest days, we saw those kinds of characteristics in terms of who they are. And that's really true for all of our children in their characteristics. So this number you have, this personality you have, is always with you. And the 2s are the helpers. And if you know you're a 2, you've probably always known of yourself to be a helping person, a helpful person, a person who values connections and relationships. The struggle of being a 2 is that you're so focused on other people's needs and taking care of other people that it's hard for you to know your own needs. Of all 9 types, it's hardest for you to know yourself, to know what you need in any situation, even though you're great at focusing on other people's needs. So as a result, 2s can't say no to people. They really struggle to set healthy boundaries. They don't just pour themselves into other people in a helpful and healthy way. They pour too much of themselves out, but they don't get much in return because they can't express their own needs. Sometimes what happens as a result is 2s end up being kind of needy people, even though they're so focused on meeting other people's needs. Now that's hard to hear maybe if you're a 2, but that's a part of what the Enneagram teaches, is that there's something about your number that's hard to hear, that's painful to recognize, and that really is a strength that's been turned into a weakness because you overutilize it. It's something you just use all the time. And for each of the 9 numbers, we'll highlight briefly what those characteristics are. What are those things that we overutilize? And this image of the Enneagram highlights that briefly by referencing what many writers talk about as the passion of each of the numbers. Some people talk about it as the sin of your number. Some people talk about it as the habit of your number. And it's something that your number struggles with. And the words that they use are kind of, it's almost like a ironic way of using the word. So when you think of 2s, most 2s aren't cocky people. So the pride that they have is not that they have a big ego and they're full of themselves. It's really that they think they can take care of everyone else, and it's difficult to let other people take care of them. So their pride comes in, they're thinking that they can be whatever other people need for them and of them, and they really haven't been able to see their own needs. But yet, what you also see for each number is this desire. Tied to that is this desire they have to be needed. 2s struggle the most with a need to be needed, but it's hard for them to communicate that. And their hope, and it's often subconscious, their hope is that by meeting other people's needs, their needs will be met. But some of you are 2s might be able to say, wow, I really don't know either what my own needs are or how to have some of my needs met. Now, one of the things I want to highlight, some of you will have questions about this, and I see one here from Shanna, is that these aren't always things that I feel, these aren't things that I recognize. A couple of things I want to say about 2 characteristics about the Enneagram. One is about the test, and one is about what we know about our number. In this brief snapshot, I can only give a few characteristics of the number. So some of what I say might not be true for everyone who has these numbers. These are generally true, and there should be something about it that's true for you, or maybe it's worth reflecting a little bit more on, oh, is that really my number or not? And secondly, don't trust a test to tell you your number. The Enneagram has been around for 2,000 years. It dates back to Pythagoras, who created the Pythagorean theorem. Remember that from middle school math? He was one of the first we knew to write about the Enneagram, and that was almost 2,000 years ago. And some people think it's even older than him. Now, in recent years, it's changed, and it has a different purpose now than it did back then, although it's always been about how do we see ourselves in a healthy and whole kind of a way. But a test to help you figure out your number is a pretty new invention. The tests have only been around for about 20 or 30 years. So if you've taken a test to figure out your number, hold it lightly. Don't let the test tell you your number. Read about the 9 numbers and decide for yourself what your number is. And that takes self-discovery. It takes discernment. And discernment takes time. When you're taking a test, they tell you not to take your time. They tell you don't overthink the questions, just think it and move on. Well, that's not a good way to really look into that mirror of your soul. It's not a good way to do self-reflection and self-awareness. You have to sit with this and ask myself, is that me? No. Is that me? Again, I'll try to give you a couple of quick snapshots of the numbers to help you figure out which one of these might be you. But don't let a test tell your number. What happens to several people I've known is they've taken the test and it's told them one number, and maybe 6 months, a year, maybe in a couple of years later, they'll realize, oh, that's not my number. That's one of the numbers that these arrows go across to. Several of the numbers are connected, and sometimes people might test and it says there are 2, but actually maybe there are 4 or an 8, or the numbers next to that number, a 1 or a 3. So there are several numbers that are connected in the Enneagram, and that's because several elements of these numbers are connected to your personality. Your personality is usually a combination of things. That's why when you hear these, you say, I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But at your core is one core number. And the test just doesn't always do a great job of telling you what that core number is. It just kind of guesses for you. And you have to sit with it and decide, is that really me? All right, I said a little bit about 2s. Let me go around real fast. And then if we have time, we'll do some questions. If not, we'll just have to schedule a follow-up time, Stephanie. Okay, so 2s are known as the givers or the helpers, but they are focused on other people's needs as a primary way of being in the world. That is what is true for 2s, is they read other people's feelings and often know other people better than they know themselves. I'm going to skip 3s for a second, go to 4s. 4s, in a lot of ways, are just the opposite of 2s. 2s know other people's feelings, but not their own. 4s are really good at knowing their own feelings. 4s live in the water of emotions, and they know their emotions. They're often overwhelmed by their emotions. Our middle son is a 4. He doesn't just have a different feeling for every day of the week. He has a different feeling for every hour of every day. He has songs for his feelings. Whatever he's feeling, there's a musical that goes with it. And he's a 16-year-old boy. So these things really do shape people in different ways. But he is a person who knows his feelings. Now, he doesn't connect with other people's feelings always that well because he's so kind of overwhelmed with his own. He really has this passion of envy because he wants to understand other people. But 4s are so tuned into their own self that they're kind of envious of how other people seem to connect with others in a way that can be hard for them. They want to know themselves and what makes them unique. But it's really hard for 4s to connect with other people, and it's hard for 2s with other people's feelings, and it's hard for 2s to connect with their own feelings. So in some ways, 2s and 4s are opposite. 3s are between those two numbers, and they are overwhelmed by feelings, so they try to avoid them. 3s are performers or achievers. They're motivated by success. They want to feel valuable, and they want to feel valuable above everything else. I'm a 3. And so almost everything in life, I turn into something that I think can be measured by whether or not I'm successful. And that can be a good thing in many ways. But when I'm trying to live so many of my relationships by questioning whether or not I'm valued, and I can't just trust that I have worth no matter what, that's really a problem. Because what happens is, in this passion of deceit, I kind of perform for other people and become whatever I think they need me to be. And it's hard for me to know my authentic self. And as a result, it's hard for me to really know my feelings. And it's hard to really connect with other people's feelings because I just want to make them happy, or I just want to entertain them, or I just want to look successful in their eyes. 2s, 3s, and 4s are all these feeling-oriented numbers, and they really wrestle with shame as kind of a core emotional struggle that they have. The 3 is the number that is kind of least in touch with their sense of shame, but 2s and 4s usually know, oh, I kind of do wrestle with shame in my life. And it's because of how important relationships are and sometimes how difficult relationships can be. All right, we're going to skip to 5, 6, and 7. You'll see that the 2, 3, and 4 are the feeling numbers. 5, 6s, and 7s are really thinking numbers. They're in their heads. And that's most true for the 5s. 5s are internal thinkers. They look around and they see the world, but they take all the information in. They're not known for sharing that information because they're so extroverted. And they're so extroverted because they're just trying to make sure they understand everything they need to understand in order to feel safe and secure in the world. They want to be capable. They want to be competent. They want to be confident. They want to be secure, but they just don't know if they know enough. And so their passion is avarice or greed, but it's not greed of things. It's greed of information or of knowing enough to be okay in the world. And they feel like they never know enough. So fives are kind of collectors of information. Fives are the one who live their lives on Google. They just always want more information. They're ones who are kind of have hobbies and all kinds of different areas of interest because they just read and take in everything. Fives are so focused on taking information in. Sevens are the kind of people, again, I'm skipping sixes. Sevens are the kind of people who love to share the information they have. Oh, I have a great idea for you. Have you ever thought about this? Let me share this with you. They're dreamers, they're enthusiasts. But for sevens, while it's easy for fives to focus internally on their own thoughts, sevens are kind of afraid of being trapped in their own thoughts or their own pain. It's really more about being trapped in their own feelings than it is their own ideas. They have this desire to be cared for, but they're afraid of being truly known. They're afraid of being able to really connect at a feeling level with themselves and with other people. But they love new experiences and new adventures. And sometimes they like to hear about other people's feelings, but to really sit with feelings for a long time is very difficult for a seven. The grass is always greener on the other side for a seven. There's always something that they think, well, if you have that kind of a problem, instead of sitting with your feelings, why don't we just fix it? They want to fix things. They want to solve things. They have these ideas that they want to share. The world is about big, bright, exciting ideas for sevens. It what gives them the sense of joy that they're often known for. And while that's a good thing, denying their inner life is a real struggle for sevens. Fives know their inner life, but it's hard for them to explore life outside of themselves and to feel okay doing that. Well, sixes are in between, and sixes just aren't sure they can trust other people or themselves. They're not sure they can trust other people's ideas or their own ideas. So sevens are trying to figure out, am I okay? Do I know enough, like sixes, but am I secure enough in the world around me, like sevens? So they're kind of in between that 5 and 7. And one of the things we say about sixes is they're kind of on this idea of a hamster wheel of the mind, where they're just thinking and oftentimes overthinking ideas. They just can't stop thinking about things. There's so much to think about, so much to know, and so much that they need to know in order to feel safe and secure. They're a little more extroverted than the fives, but they still really wrestle with, am I going to be okay? Now, they're very loyal. They really value community and they value connection. But even in those relationships, sometimes they find themselves kind of second guessing other people in their lives and even themselves. Sixes are a little more anxious than many other numbers and a little more connected to the sense of fear of, am I okay? 5, 6s, and 7s all wrestle with fear a little bit. It's because these three numbers tend to overthink things. 2s, 3s, and 4s tend to overfeel things, although 3s deny it. 5, 6s, and 7s tend to overthink things, although 6s sometimes don't see that either. The middle numbers, the 3, 6, and the 9, kind of struggle with this grouping that they're a part of to figure out, is that really me or not? Which is sometimes why it's difficult in a test for a test to be able to point this out with you. You kind of need to just sit with it. And I tell people, if you're not sure between two numbers, just kind of sit with each number for a couple of weeks to allow yourself time to really figure out, am I this or am I this? And sometimes it takes even more time than that. So quickly, the next group of 3, you'll notice Enneagram is all about these 3 groups of 3s. There's another grouping of 3s we could talk about. if we had more time with Enneagram. But this third group we'll talk about tonight as we wrap up are these doing numbers. The first three numbers are kind of the feeling numbers of the heart. The second three numbers are the thinking numbers of the head. These are the doing numbers that have this ability to kind of follow their gut or their body. And the 8 is the most well known for this. The 8 just kind of trusts their gut. And their gut is just always keeping them moving. And it's always causing them to step in and fill a void if they feel someone else isn't going to fill that void. So if someone else is not leading, the 8 is going to lead. That's what gets them labeled as the boss or the challenger. They're not trying to be bossy. They just don't want to be bossed around by someone else. And they don't want to be led down a road where something's going to fall apart or not go well. Trust is really important for the 8s, but it's difficult for 8s to trust other people sometimes because they want to be in control of their life. That's their desire. I want to be in control. I don't want other people telling me what to do. Well, you can imagine being married to someone like that. That's difficult in relationships. It's difficult in all kinds of situations. But we all have something like that we struggle with. And for the 8, it's just, I feel like I need to make the decisions, and it's hard for me to trust other people to make decisions for me. So I'm just going to go with my gut because my gut almost never fails me. And it's remarkable that 8s have that ability to be able to just make confident decisions. Now, there's a difference between two of the other numbers we were talking about. 5s and 6s almost never have that great confidence to be able to just make a decision and go with it. 5s always need to read a little bit more before they make a decision. 6s usually need to connect with some friends and ask people, kind of check in. 8s are like, I don't have time for that. I know what's right. Let's go. And you just have to get in line or get left behind if you're connected to an 8. 8s always trust themselves. Sometimes they're seen as fighters. They're not really trying to pick a fight. They just know what needs to be done and they want to go with it. We're going to skip the 9s and go to the 1s. The 1s sometimes we call the fixers. If the 8s are the fighters, the 1s are the fixers. We live in a world that's broken and needs to be reformed or perfected. They want everything to be done well and right and thoroughly. Their desire is to be good, to be a person of integrity. Now, this is one of those points where you might say, oh, I want to be good. I want the world to be good. Well, in some ways, who doesn't, right? But 1s are trapped by these voices in their head that are always telling them they're not quite measuring up. They're not quite good enough. And they always think, I can't be finished with this yet. I need to just double check it a little bit more. I'm not sure I can let other people see my work. I'm not sure if it's good enough. I'm not sure I've done this well enough. I'm not sure if I've done this right. And sometimes that kind of overflows into the lives of other people that 1s love. So sometimes we feel judged by 1s because they want everything to be good in our lives too. They're reforming us as well as themselves. And it's because in their mind, they think that's just how the world needs to be. Well, they don't often think of themselves as perfectionists. So I label them out on here, but sometimes I call them reformers instead, because they don't think of themselves as perfect. They think of themselves as never measuring up, never being good enough. And that's oftentimes how you know if you're a 1, if you have these voices in your head that are telling you you're just not quite good enough, or you haven't done that job thoroughly enough, or you haven't done that job right. 1s like to achieve things, but so do several other numbers. What really sets a 1 apart is that need for it to be done the right way. And 9s are in between the 8 and the 1. 9s look at the 8s and see all of their energy, and they look at the 1s and they see them trying to do everything right, and 9s are just like, oh, I just don't have the energy to do everything. So 9s are just kind of the take it easy number. They know what needs to be done. They kind of know what their gut is telling them, but they're always second guessing themselves and saying, do I have the energy for that? And if I have the energy, what if it causes conflict with someone? Their desire is to avoid conflict, to avoid anything that takes more energy than what is required of them. And so their passion, you see, is sloth. It doesn't mean they're lazy. It just oftentimes means they're slow to decide. And when they do decide quickly, it's because they're just taking the path of least resistance. A 9 will oftentimes just do whatever is right in front of them and just go along with the flow because they think that's the easiest thing in the situation. And they're always looking for whatever is easiest. Avoiding conflict is what's most important to a 9. And if they can't figure out any other way to avoid conflict or to go with what's easiest, then they'll just take a nap or go to bed. One of our sons is a 9 and one of our sons is an 8. And they're really close on the days when they're getting along, when the 8 gets his way and the 9 just goes along with the 8. But when the 9 decides to stand up for himself and the 8 doesn't like it, oh, the conflict it causes the 9 is so painful. And his decision is usually, I'm just going to go take a nap. And so he's either taking a nap or he just kind of holes up in his room until the 8 gets distracted and does something else. Because the 9 just wants to avoid the conflict. All right, well, that is a quick tour. One of the things I'll just kind of repeat is, I know in this 15-minute overview, from that, you won't be able to figure out your number. So how do you do it? Well, the test is a starter, but don't trust the test. Come back to this and kind of read about each of the 9 numbers. And then one particular website I'll give you is the Enneagram Institute. EnneagramInstitute.com has a test that they've created, but then they also just have great resources. And one of the things I tell people is just to, and on their website, you can click on a number and it'll give you 2 or 3 pages worth of information on each of the numbers. Just read through some of that information. And in addition to that, you can type in, they have a place where you can type in 2 different numbers and compare. If you're not sure if you're a 2 or a 3, you can type in those 2 numbers and read about the similarities and the differences. Or if you're not sure if you're an 8 or a 1, you can type in those 2 numbers and it'll help you tease out which one of those is most true. All right, well, I'm going to pause there, see what Stephanie wants to do to take it from here. And I really do appreciate your time and hope this has some value.
I love it. I think I want to go back to what you started with, is that, like, it's kind of being self-aware of who you are and not being like, oh my gosh, I'm this number, I'm doomed, but find out what the good things are and then find out what the things that you're going to struggle with. And I'm a 7. So I have noticed that, I'm like, okay, it talks to me about, like, I need to meditate. I don't need to be overly excited about all the things, And so my team's like, yes, it's so fun and everything's great. But kind of resting in my emotions and feelings and all that kind of stuff has been really helpful to kind of sit back and go, okay, I need to kind of sit in this, and I need to be okay with mourning and grieving and all those kind of things, So sometimes, and I've heard this, and maybe this is true, like, because some of them I'm like, oh, I'm kind of that. Oh, I'm kind of that. Is it true that, like, sometimes when you're healthy, you're maybe 1, but when you're not healthy, you kind of tend to go to another one?
Yeah, so you have a core number that's always you. So the first thing you have to figure out with the Enneagram is, what is your core number? But then, if you'll notice on the diagram, and you can just Google Enneagram and find all kinds of images of it. Now, you'll find some strange articles about it too, because it's been around so long that people have all these different opinions about what it is. But if you find a diagram of the Enneagram and you figure out your core number, look at the 2 numbers that you connect to. And one of the things that happens is you tend to take on the characteristics of those other numbers in good and bad situations. Now, some people will say 1 is a stress number. You take on more of that number in stressful times, and the other is a secure number, and you take on that numbers in better times. Well, that's kind of true, but really, depending on the situation, you just have some of the characteristics of those numbers. So I'll say for me, I'm a 3, and the numbers I connect to are a 6 and a 9. Well, 3s are kind of go, go, go. We always want people to like us. We want to be achieving things because that's how we think we're valued. But when I get overwhelmed by all the things on my to-do list, I take on the characteristics of the 9 and just want to duck out. I just want to avoid. I just need to stop. Well, actually, that can be a good thing for me as well as a bad thing. Sometimes I need to slow down. but I don't need to just check out. One of my worst habits is at the end of a long day, when I'm done, but I still have things that should be done around the house to help out my family, but I'm too tired or too stressed, I just fall asleep. And my wife's like, really? Now you're going to fall asleep? But there's still dishes, there's still laundry, we're not ready for school tomorrow. And so I have to learn to kind of pace myself so that I don't take on the bad characteristics of that number. Also, I can have some 6 connections. And as a 6, I can get anxious about things, but I also can use the good parts of a 6 and be really connected in important ways with people and loyal in relationships. And it's just, even before I knew the Enneagram, I had those characteristics.
Right.
And the Enneagram just kind of gives you language for that.
So do you find like when you're dealing with people at work or, different people, like you're like, oh, they're a blah, blah, blah. I mean, are you able to kind of go, okay, they're acting this way because they're an 8. Like your wife, you said your wife or I feel like we have a lot of 8s on our team, but then I thought it was interesting we had a lot of 2s, which makes sense since we like to help people, right? So it's totally awesome that we like to help people. And it's obviously what makes us really good at what we do. But are you able to, when you're helping a customer, like that's what I wanted our team to do is like kind of go, okay, yeah, like maybe you recognize in a coach or a customer, this is the way they are, their personality type. And so then you're able to communicate with them and say, okay, this is the way they are. So if I'm this way, that's probably going to turn them off,
Yeah, so the thing I would say about that is use it more to know what you bring to those conversations than someone else. It's really impossible to know someone else's number.
Okay.
Unless they know it and can tell it to you.
Okay.
I mean, I've been this for 10 years and I mistype people. And you really don't want to mistype someone.
Yeah. So more like know yourself. So know what you struggle with. So if you have a hard time, if you're a 2 and you have a hard time saying no, realize that about yourself and go, okay, I need to create boundaries. Yeah, or, or if you're a 7 like me, don't make me be excited about all the things. Like just, that makes people think that you're inauthentic and that sort of thing. So I think know thyself, is kind of what you're saying.
Right.
And that's super important. And in being able to talk to other people, that's important to know thyself first. And then you're able to deal with other people because your own self is in check, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So two kind of final things I say about the Enneagram is don't use it as an excuse and don't use it as a weapon. Don't use it as an excuse for your behavior. If you're an 8, say, well, I guess I'm just being a bully again. I guess I'm just being harsh on people. Because sometimes 8s can kind of feel that way. They know that they're kind of large and in charge, and they know or they feel that everybody around them is a little too sensitive, and they just kind of want to use it as an excuse. Well, no, don't use it as an excuse. Know yourself and think, how can I honestly wonder, am I being a little too harsh on people? So don't use it as an excuse, but also don't use it as a weapon. Don't use it to the 8s in your life. If you're a 2 or a 4 or a 3 or whatever, don't go to the 8s and say, well, there you go being a bully again because you're an 8. Or if you're working with a 5, well, there you go being an introvert again because you're a 5. Well, aren't you just talking? It's just because you're a 5. So be very careful about not using it as a weapon to someone else. Sometimes when you do know their number, it's easy to kind of victimize people or blame people. Well, know that they're on a journey too. And you really can't control these things about yourself. Again, this is part of your brain's chemistry, and you've been shaped this way over the course of a lifetime. Now, you can grow and rough out the edges and take on some new characteristics, but you will inevitably fall back into these same characteristics. And just kind of always be aware that that's how you are, and that's how everyone else in your life is.
Yeah, being empathetic with them.
Yes, absolutely.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Jon, so much. This is so helpful. And hopefully you guys feel like this is helpful and you're not like, oh, I'm stuck. I am this way. But you're able to go, okay. I think in this last year, I've tried to learn more about my strengths and who I am. And I think being okay with who I am and the way that I'm created has been really a huge part of my journey this year. And so hopefully for our coaches this year, we'll be okay with who we are and the way that God wired us, but we'll be able to communicate with others better because we know who we are. So that's super important. So thank you, Jon. You can follow Jon on Facebook, Jon Singletary, Instagram, Twitter. He's a wealth of knowledge. Sick 'em bears.
You'll see crazy stuff about my family more than anything.
You have 4 kids?
We have 4 and a bonus son. So we have a 5th that we've taken in, who was our oldest son's best friend, who moved in with us 3 years ago. So 5 teenagers in this house. Woo! Crazy.
5, yikes. So pray for him
Yes.
every night. So thank you, Jon, so much. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely, Stephanie.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.